I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement and recognition. We recognize today that this land is the territory of the Massachusetts, the Pawtucket, and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and the Nipmuc peoples, who have stewarded this land for hundreds of generations. We recognize that where we stand today was once on the edge of the Great Bay, where the ancient weirs stood, where the First Nations people and the first inhabitants of this land served and built communities before the Europeans came. We recognize and honor this history and pay tribute to them and their societies. Welcome to this groundbreaking of the Coconut Grove Memorial, a long time coming. Thank you for coming. I'm Paul Miller. I'm the president of the Coconut Grove Memorial Committee. I'm a resident of Bay Village and the co-writer of the documentary film Six Locked Doors. We welcome Mayor Wu, Ambassador Flynn, all the Coconut Grove families, and distinguished guests. I'd like to start by recognizing the members of the Memorial Committee. Good catch. Mike Hanlon's Vice President and founding member of the Coconut Grove Memorial Committee. Ambassador Raymond Flynn, former mayor of the City of Boston, former ambassador to the Vatican. Paul Christian, former fire commissioner, Boston Fire Department, and Coconut Grove historian. Ruth Knopf, past president of the Bay Village Neighborhood Association. Marty Pierce, former fire commissioner. Ed Kelly from Ladder 17, general president of the International Firefighters Association. Lorraine Carley, National Fire Protection Association vice president. Dr. Barbara Poremba, professor of nursing at Salem State and leader at the Friends of the U.S. Cadet Nurses Service. Stephanie Schroe, the author of Coconut Grove. Professor James Fox, Northeastern University, who lost 2 aunts in the fire. Ed Skip McCormick, who lost his aunt in the fire. Jim Cavan, former president of Dover's Historical Society, who lost a great uncle in the fire. Richie Rouse, former state legislator and sheriff of Suffolk County, whose aunt was badly injured in the fire. Ed Flynn, Boston City Council President, District 2, who represents the Bay Village neighborhood. Casey Grant, former director of the Fire Protection Research Foundation. David Blaney, Coconut Grove historian and author. Zach Graves Miller, writer and producer of the documentary Six Locked Doors. Jim Caffarelli, former owner of the Rustic Kitchen here in Park Square. Bill Noonan, former Boston Fire Department photographer, and Greg Wayland, former news anchor for the New England Cable News. And finally, Dr. Ken Marshall. He's a founding member and past president of the committee. He served on the board of the Nimitz in New York. And I'd like to take a moment here to honor Dr. Marshall. He passed away this year, and he's a big loss to the committee. He was a non-stop advocate for this memorial, and we miss him dearly. His mother was a nurse on duty at Boston City that night and stayed for 3 days. His far-reaching medical career helped thousands of people around the world with facial reconstruction. He was a leader and a friend, and we miss him dearly. He will always be remembered for his tireless dedication to this memorial, and Doc, we miss you terribly. Now I'd like to introduce Father John Curry, chaplain of the Boston Fire Department, for a prayer and invocation. Thank you, Father.
Good afternoon, everyone. An honor to be with all of you today. Let us pray. Almighty ever-living God, come to our aid as we consecrate and bless, through your grace, the ground upon which a noble, fitting memorial will rise in honor of 490 souls who perished in the most tragic of ways. May they rest eternally in the grace of your peace, and may all who continue to mourn their loss be comforted by the hope which comes from your divine love and mercy. And may everyone who will come to visit or pass by this holy place pause for a moment and remember them in thoughtful prayer. Here, Lord, on this sacred ground, a resolute, virtuous tribute will stand guard not only to the memory of the victims, but also in honor of the survivors, first responders, and medical professionals whose witness and actions on that fateful night and in the days and weeks that followed were heroic. A tribute to the innate human spirit that eternally compels us to come to the rescue of anyone in need. May the strong arches envisioned for this memorial to be adorned with names that echo throughout time, inspire the souls of everyone who will gaze upon and contemplate them to respond with equal compassion and devotion, drawn from the strength of these arches to the troubles and struggles of any man, woman, or child in distress, as our brothers and sisters did in 1942. Father, often through tragedy, your grace and wisdom shines, illuminating the human spirit and intellect to discover new and better ways for us to care for and protect one another, as it did by giving us insights and innovations that led to improvements in medical care, building codes, and fire safety regulations through the events of November 28, 1942. May this memorial and the memory of the 490 souls motivate us to keep pushing forward, envisioning now even better advancements in medical care and safety regulations, as well as improvements in every other manner of life that we share in solidarity with each other, without waiting for the next horrific event to spur us into action. For these prayers, and for all of the prayers of our hearts, we ask your blessing as we consecrate this holy ground to you and the victims of the Coconut Grove fire, and in honor of the survivors, first responders, and medical professionals forever linked to those who perished. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.
Thank you, Father Curry. I would like to welcome Mayor Wu and thank you for recognizing the importance of the permanent memorial here in Boston. We are so close to our goal, and it's because of you. Thank you. I would like to thank the Boston Arts Commission, the Mayor's Office on Arts and Culture, and particularly Karen Goodfellow, Director of Public Art, and Sarah Rodrigo, Public Art Project Manager for the memorial. We cannot thank these two people enough. Also, all the incredible staff at City Hall who've been invaluable and tireless to get us to where we are here today. Special thanks to Boston Parks Commissioner Ryan Woods and Chief Landscape Architect Liza Meyer. Their stewardship, their support, and expertise has brought us to this point, and without them, we wouldn't be here. Each has contributed to this long overdue and worthy memorial, and we, along with the Coconut Grove families, deeply appreciate their support. Welcome to all the guests, especially the families of victims and survivors, and there's so many here today. We really appreciate you coming and being here with us. We are here today. If you are here today, you are part of the Coconut Grove community. We have family members of the two remaining survivors, Joy Spector and Bob Shumay. Thank you for being here to represent your families. Whether you come here today to remember a family member, pay tribute to a survivor, come to honor the first responders, or you come to celebrate the great advancements born here in Boston from this terrible tragedy, which continue to save and protect millions of lives around the world every year. Or perhaps you're here to ensure that our collective history isn't erased or forgotten. Whatever brings you here today, we welcome you and encourage you to feel safe and tell your story here. Share your remembrances, meet new friends, and join our community with the common goal of creating the permanent memorial here in Park Square. We must always remember our history while forging forward to build and improve our communities. One of the ways we do this is by memorials. Mayor Wu and the Mayor's Office on Arts and Culture recognize this. There isn't a more dedicated and creative team anywhere who understand the power of these events and the power these memorials have for bringing together communities. For instance, the Embrace, honoring Dr. and Coretta Scott King, the Journey of Our Souls, honoring Frederick Douglass and Francis Harper. These projects are bringing together communities and bringing together families. And now, the Coconut Grove. Long overdue, but this memorial will ensure that future generations will always remember what happened here 81 years ago, and that the legacy of that night will always be in our hearts. All this because of you, everyone here today. With that, I'd like to introduce a major force in memorializing the Coconut Grove, the first mayor to recognize the deep importance and lasting legacy of the fire, the first mayor to take action on the 50th anniversary by placing the Mara plaque at the site in Bay Village on Piedmont Street. I'd like to introduce, please welcome former ambassador to the Vatican, Mayor Ray Flynn.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for all of us to be here today at this historic groundbreaking. You know, it's kind of funny that you people are as much responsible for this taking place because of the obvious turnout of admirers to the Coconut Grove Memorial. You know, this is one of the most traveled spots in all of the United States. In the summer, various holidays, the Boston Tea Party, July 4th, everybody comes to Boston, and this will be a historic part of what they want to see. So thank you for doing that. I have to say that the firefighters have always been looked up to by the citizens of Boston. So if the original Coconut Grove fire seems like a long time ago, and it was, these firefighters kept the memory of the fire department and their historic implementation of the rules and the conduct and professional behavior of firefighters all across the United States. And we thank them for that. We also thank the committee who stepped forward and got involved and put the emphasis on this memorial. I have to tell you one little anecdote. As a kid growing up, even after that, my brother Dennis, who was an idol for me, he was a highly decorated soldier in Vietnam. And he came home, what he wanted to be more than anything was a firefighter. And he won numerous awards for bravery. That's who he was. The best in his outfit in the Army. He wanted to come here to Boston and to be a firefighter and to serve you. You know, where did they get that? Where did they get that admiration and that feeling of pride? Well, they get it from you. They're up there now looking down at us, many of them deceased, and they're looking down at you and they're saying to themselves, wow, they haven't forgotten us. They haven't forgotten us at all. So it's their day, the firefighters, it's the administration of the firefighters, it's Michelle Wu and her team, her great team at City Hall, and it's all of you especially, because you never let anybody forget the memorial and the significance of this day. We'll all come walking by here in a few years, and maybe it's forgotten. So many people move in to Boston each and every day. So many students come here to learn, participate. So many newcomers come here as well. Now they got the best memorial to understand what Boston is about. Thank you, folks, for being witness to this great day. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce the Mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, my dear friend.
Good afternoon, everyone. I always hate to follow Mayor and Ambassador Flynn. There's no one who knows the city better, who has poured into every single corner of our community, and who holds the history and legacy of what it means to lead in the city of Boston. So thank you for all that you continue to do. Thank you to the entire family, Mrs. Flynn and Brendan and everyone. I'm honored to serve alongside several of the leaders who are here today. City Council President Ed Flynn, thank you for all that you do and for representing this area so well. City Councilor at Large Aaron Murphy is here as well, as always, at every major community event. And even though they're not technically elected, Father Curry, Grand Rabbi Korf, and so many of the leaders who you see here are present in every moment of celebration and triumph, and also when community most needs comfort. And today we have a little bit of that mixed feeling here. I want to thank Paul and the entire Coconut Grove Memorial Committee, to our representatives who have seen the legacy through many, many years of what it means to hold up the first and finest fire department in the country. I'm blessed to have serving in our cabinet Commissioner Paul Burke, who's here, to work alongside Local 718 President Sam Dillon and Vice President Leroy Haywood, to have based in Boston, representing internationally, President Ed Kelly of the International Firefighters Association. And we are also blessed to be able to trace this legacy and lineage of leadership through our former commissioners who join us today, Commissioner Paul Christian, Commissioner Marty Pierce, both of whom have been very much involved with this memorial. And thank you, again, as mentioned, to all of our amazing team members at the City of Boston, Commissioner Woods of the Parks Department, and Cara Elliott Ortega of the Arts Cabinet, and everyone who has been involved. We're incredibly grateful. You know, the first thing I said to several of the folks as I arrived here today was long time no see, because several of us were just together yesterday, multiple times yesterday, in fact, when we went straight from a tree lighting, kicking off the holiday season in Rosendale Square, where Commissioner Burke and my two kids drove in on the fire truck, and we counted down and lit that up, and then I hopped over to a trolley tour to go through 8 different tree lightings in Dorchester, and then all of a sudden you could look up and see the plumes of smoke across the neighborhood. And on a weekend when so many are just relaxing, enjoying those leftover turkey sandwiches, having a time with their family, and just being able to be at home, it was once again our first responders who were called when that 6-alarm fire ended up coming in. And on Ellington Street, we heard very familiar comments as to what we're talking about today. In an instant, everything, the flames were engulfing the entire building and threatening the ones next to it. I spoke with 2 young gentlemen who lived down the street who said that their smoke alarms went off even though the fire was all the way at the end of the block. And they ran outside and ran towards the fire to see what they could do to help, to get their neighbors out to safety, to help one gentleman who needed extra care into the ambulance. And it was in that moment of the conversation with these 2 young gentlemen who were still there, probably 20 minutes after the fire had even been put out, and our firefighters were hard at work and still up on a ladder getting the hose on the last little bits just to make sure it wouldn't spark back up. And they said to me, "We think we want to be firefighters." So Leroy Haywood went over, handed him his card, and told him to give him a call. And there's no question that what our heroic first responders did yesterday in putting out that huge fire with every single person out safe with their loved ones today, that we trace that directly to the legacy of what we are breaking ground on here today. Boston is a city that is known around the world as a place that comes together in times of difficulty, and somehow, some way, through our grief, through our pain, finds the energy to keep pouring back into community, to keep making sure that those surviving families and the grieving loved ones can stay on their feet until the time when they are ready to build our community even stronger. And so to the family members who are here, to all those who have been touched by this tragedy several decades ago, we thank you for continuing to hold that torch of what it means to be part of our community and keep pouring in so that the memories of your loved ones continue to inspire and make a difference even today, even yesterday, and even every day forward. Last year at the 80th anniversary service, we were gathered just a few blocks away at Piedmont Street and Coconut Grove Lane, where the plaque that Mayor Flynn commissioned honors the nearly 500 people who lost their lives. The fire at the Grove is still the deadliest moment in our city's history and the deadliest nightclub fire in the country's history. It was 1942, the weekend after Thanksgiving, right here in Bay Village, and the club was hosting more than double its occupancy limit. The Grove, as it was known, was one of our city's most popular nightclubs. It was where everyone, from workers getting off their shifts, to celebrities, to service members on leave, came together to mingle and dance and, for a few hours, forget the tragedies of war. People were seeking community and camaraderie that first Thanksgiving weekend since America had entered the war. And what started as a small fire in the basement lounge, in an instant, spread and engulfed the entire club. In less than 30 minutes, the fire was out, thanks to the work of the Boston Fire Department. Their response time that night prevented a worse tragedy, but already nearly half of the Grove's patrons lost their lives. We're here today to break ground on a memorial that honors each of them. I'm grateful to the Coconut Grove Memorial Committee for working tirelessly to get this memorial established, to all of our teams at the city who have helped get this underway, and to the artists at Recite for helping our community create this memorial. A replica of the 3 archways that welcomed patrons at the Grove's entrance will be constructed from 490 pieces of granite bearing the names of those family members and loved ones who died that night. This memorial will symbolize our resilience. It will ensure that those we've lost are not forgotten, and it will continue to remind us that we, as a city and a community, have always come together and marked profound progress in the face of unspeakable tragedy. In response to that fire, Boston developed more rigorous laws and codes around fire safety at every level of government that set national standards. We discovered new ways to treat burns, life-saving advancements that are still used around the world today. And we were graced with a groundbreaking understanding of trauma and grief that has served as a foundation for mental health care and treatment in the United States. Even in one of our most tragic moments, in the fallout of our deadliest days, this community came together. We leaned on our family, friends, and neighbors, knowing full well that those who needed to would lean on us as well. And on that plaque on Piedmont Street is the phrase, "Phoenix out of the ashes." All of these contributions around building safety, innovations in healthcare, and community are all the phoenix that rose from the ashes of this tragedy. Yesterday, I found myself thinking about that as we watched the firefighters still hard at work, as we saw community members out on the sidewalk thinking about how to put together the pieces of their lives. All that we do, all the heroism that I am blessed to see every single day as mayor of this city can be traced to the history that we have also lived through. And so I want to thank you again, and I'm incredibly proud to be breaking ground on this memorial with everyone here today. Finally, I would just mention that even though Tuesday is the official day, we have prepared an official City of Boston proclamation on behalf of all of us in city government to mark the anniversary of the Coconut Grove Fire of 1942, and we will be officially commemorating that 81st anniversary and declaring Statler Park the site of the Coconut Grove Memorial.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here, Mayor Will. Thank you. I'd like to next introduce another great champion of the memorial and of this great city, Boston City Council President Ed Flynn, who represents Bay Village neighborhood since 2017.
Thank you, Paul. I'm honored to be here with my colleagues in government, as Mayor Wu mentioned, Councilor Erin Murphy, but I also know and want to acknowledge our partnership with state officials as well, including Aaron Michaelitz, who also represents this area, and Senator Nick Collins and Lydia Edwards as well. Honored to be with my parents, with the members of the committee, the Boston Fire Department, and with mine and with Mayor Wu's constituents right here across the street at South Cove, which is a large Asian community that we're both proud to represent. I wanted to say that this horrific fire had a tremendous impact, certainly on the families, but also on the city. And even during very difficult times, that we must always remember those difficult times, but we also learn from them as well. And one thing Boston does is we remember those heroes that fought that fire, the men and women of the Boston Fire Department, the servicemen, the medical community, always giving back, trying to make things better for the survivors, for their family. So out of that terrible day when we lost over almost 500 people, we also acknowledge the incredible heroes that were among us, that saved so many lives and continued to help build this city from that tragedy that Boston experienced. So just want to say thank you to the committee, thank you to the Boston Fire Department, the military personnel, and the medical community that was on scene, who did heroic work as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. Next, I'd like to introduce Ryan Woods, Commissioner of the Parks Department. Ryan has served as Parks Commissioner since 2019 and is veteran of the Parks Department since 2007, and he is a great asset to our city. Ryan.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to serve as the Parks Commissioner for the City of Boston, overseeing our 332 properties from parks, playgrounds, cemetery, golf courses, urban wilds, and our animal control division throughout the city. I want to start by congratulating the committee for the decades of work they have done to make this memorial come to fruition, and specifically the years that it's taken to finalize a design with such intentionality. Something that honors the 492 members that passed that day and have their names appear on this memorial. There were many different iterations. Do you do it Coconut? Do you do the facade? And I think with such intentionality, they came to the conclusion with this perfect design that we will welcome here on our property. And the exciting thing of having this in Statler Park is that this is an Article 97 protected public open space. So this will not be developed. This will always remain a park. And we're excited to have this as a permanent memorial that will remain in this park. We'll continue to maintain the grounds and welcome the thousands of visitors that will come by to honor those that passed, learn of the history, and be present in the moment. We look forward to joining you here for the ribbon cutting. And again, the Parks Department is happy to be a partner to see this important project come to fruition. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Next, let me introduce Boston Fire Commissioner Paul Burke, a 32-year veteran of the fire department who served as the fire commissioner since 2022.
Thank you, Paul Miller. Thank you, Michael Hanlon, also. Your committee is very important to the city. And thank Father Curry and Rabbi Koff for your spiritual leadership of this fire department. On behalf of the entire Boston Fire Department, I offer our deepest condolences to anyone here today who lost a family member or friend at the Coconut Grove fire. No other fire in the history of our city has had such a lasting impact, not only on Boston, but also on the entire country. The death of 492 people in one fire is almost impossible to comprehend. That is why today is so important, because we are here to mark the groundbreaking for this monument to honor those who lost their lives in this tragic fire. This monument ensures those lives lost will never be forgotten. The passage of time does not lessen the loss of the 492 people. It is still unthinkable today as it was back then. As a city, we rallied behind the survivors when the tragedy happened, and with this monument, we will forever keep their memory alive. This is how the night took place as described by a fire chief's report. Quote, "The weather outside was clear and cold with a temperature of 28 degrees. A show was about to begin in the main dining room. There was approximately 1,000 patrons in attendance. At around 10:15 p.m., a fire started in the Melody Lounge located in the basement of the establishment. Within 2 to 4 minutes, the fire appeared in the street-level lobby. It was described as a rapidly traveling ball of fire. Most of the lights in the club went out immediately upon the appearance of fire. This fact, coupled with the appearance of smoke and flames and the shouts of fire, produced great confusion." End of quote. The Boston Fire Department performed admirably that night, as they do every day. But because of what happened at the Coconut Grove, with the locked and blocked exits, flammable decorations, the lights going off, and more patrons than the occupancy was allowed, our department began to aggressively put more focus on fire prevention and education. We now start in elementary schools with fire safety awareness programs. We also visit elderly housing facilities and educate the residents in fire safety procedures and how to practice safe cooking habits. I believe these fire prevention education programs have created a safer city and prevented a tragedy of this magnitude from ever happening again. Because of this fire, our department has a team of fire inspectors assigned to inspect nightclubs. They work nights and conduct surprise safety inspections at nightclubs throughout our city. Those inspectors check for overcrowding. They make sure the exits are not blocked and are visible for all to see. They also test the emergency lighting to make sure it goes on when the electricity goes out. We also review all building plans for all new nightclubs and any renovations to propose existing clubs. We have the authority to shut down any establishment where we find fire code violations. The material that covers any walls, if permitted, must be tested for flammability by our department chemist, and the nightclubs all must have fire sprinklers. This authority to inspect and continually monitor nightclubs came about because of the Coconut Grove. In the wake of this fire, our department, with the support of our elected leaders, took the initiative and wrote some of the toughest fire prevention laws in the country. We're proud that our department is responsible for these laws that have become a national standard. Boston is the safest city now because of these laws and the tragedy. I just want to tell you a quick story. I was a firefighter working with an old fire captain once. We went to monitor the testing of a new sprinkler system in a new residential building in East Boston. The contractor was verbally abusive to us throughout the process. He said things like, "This is a shakedown by the city just to get money from hardworking citizens." This captain, a very distinguished man who knew his profession very well, finally had had enough. He very calmly asked the contractor if he'd ever heard of the Coconut Grove. He did not. The captain went on to educate him on the fire at the Coconut Grove and how tragic it was, one of the largest loss of lives in a fire in the whole country. He described how the fire exits were blocked and the doors opened inward and could not handle the occupancy load. The decorations were flammable, the nightclub was over capacity, and every other issue that contributed to this horrific loss of life. He finished by politely saying that we are here today monitoring and testing of these new sprinklers. The city of Boston values the life of all people to protect the citizens from reoccurrence in an event like the Coconut Grove. You have to pay a permit fee. We're sorry for that, but we will continue enforcing fire prevention laws in the city to prevent another Coconut Grove. Needless to say, I was impressed with that captain's composure and firm but candid response, so much so that I never forgot it so many years later. His response sums up to me something positive that transpired from this tragedy. We will never know how many people's lives have been saved because of the fire prevention laws that were enacted due to what happened at the Coconut Grove on November 28, 1942. I'd also like to mention that the Coconut Grove fire happened 2 weeks after another tragic fire. On November 15, 1942, the Boston Fire Department lost 6 firefighters killed fighting a terrible fire at the Luongo restaurant in East Boston. Please keep them in your thoughts. As individuals, I believe a way to honor the lives lost at the Coconut Grove is to practice fire safety routines in everyday life. As your commissioner, I ask you to be aware of your surroundings while in public. Identify all the exits. Statistics show that most people, while in a public place, tend to exit the same way they came in. That may not be possible during an emergency. Increase your situational awareness. Know all your exits. Those few minutes of preparation can save your life during an emergency. I'm proud to lead a department that has served this city with so much dignity and honor over so many years, not just in fire suppression, but also in fire prevention. I once again offer our deepest condolences for the people's lost lives 81 years ago, just a few blocks from here. This monument is another way we as a city continue to heal and remember the lives lost. I'm honored to be here, and I look forward to coming back next year when the monument is completed. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Let me now introduce Dr. Barbara Parumba, Professor of Nursing at Salem State and a leader at the Friends of the U.S. Cadet Nurses Service.
Thank you. Let's see if I can find my using technology. I am so pleased to be here today and to represent the medical community, the doctors, and in particular the nurses from Boston City Hospital and Mass General who cared for the Coconut Grove victims. Mortality-wise, the Coconut Grove fire was the second oldest building fire in the history of the United States, second only to that of the Chicago Theater fire. On Saturday evening, November 28, 1942, the club was packed with about 1,000 people, double its legal capacity. 490 people lost their lives, making the mortality rate nearly 50%. It may have been even greater were hospitals not preparing for mass casualty emergencies due to the war. Just 1 week prior, Boston hospitals had conducted a mass disaster drill and stockpiled supplies for burn injuries. They had also been conducting research on the care of burns because of the high probability that these injuries would occur in the event of a war bomb on the Boston Naval Fleet, similar to Pearl Harbor. When the first patients arrived at the hospital's accident room, the accident rooms were not like our emergency rooms. They were only equipped to do suturing and casting. There were no modern emergency rooms, and there were no intensive care units. It was nearly the 11 p.m. change of shift, so that double the complement of hospital staff were available. Since nursing students lived at the hospitals, they were swiftly mobilized, and also all the off-duty personnel and volunteers were called. Over a 75-minute period, Boston City Hospital received 429 patients. 300 were dead on arrival or nearly dead, and 129 were admitted. This volume averaging 1 patient every 11 seconds, exceeded the treatment rate encountered in London during the Blitz and is one of the highest admission rates recorded. Mass General received 114 patients, 75 dead on arrival, 39 were admitted. Overwhelmed by the magnitude of casualties over such a rapid period of time, doctors turned to new experimental procedures to try to save lives. Of those admitted, nearly 80% survived their very critical burn wounds and pulmonary injuries. This required not only days, weeks, months, and in one case, over a year of hospital medical care and intensive nursing. The success of these practices would soon be used to treat war casualties as well as civilian victims at the Hartford Circus Fire in 1944. These significant medical advances include the life-saving advances in burn treatment, such as surface mapping, surgical management, infection prevention and control, including the first ever use of penicillin in the civilian population, plasma and fluid replacement, respiratory trauma management, and the development of specialized nursing burn units. Advancements also in the understanding of survivors' guilt and grief and treatment for what we now know as PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, was experienced not only by the caregivers, but also the victims, and again, the caregivers who saw the suffering, and many who suffered for years. And finally, advancements in emergency triage and disaster planning and management for mass casualties. If there is a small silver lining to this tragedy, it is that these advancements would go on to save thousands and thousands of lives. May these medical achievements be remembered as a legacy to the victims of the Coconut Grove fire. Thank you.
As you can see, the people of the city have a great deal of respect for the Boston Fire Department, and it was great for all of us to be witness to the appointments of various fire commissioners that served the city's interest in such an admirable way. You can talk about the tragic fire where so many people were killed, but we could write hundreds of articles about the number of people were saved in fires throughout this neighborhood. Probably all of us have probably seen a number of them. One of those heroes I'd like to introduce now is a former fire commissioner of the city of Boston, Paul Christian.
Thank you, man. Congratulations. Thank you, Ambassador Flynn. It's an honor to speak at this occasion. I know this has been quite a while in the coming. I've been asked along the way by different people, why wasn't this done sooner? The only answer I can come up with, based on a lifetime of hearing about the Coconut Grove fire, was the pain was too severe. Over the years, for those many, many families who were victims of this, as well as those who had personal experience and suffered the injuries. This was a painful experience for all the people of Boston. So it wasn't something they really wanted to mark. However, the passage of time has brought us to this time now where it's suitable because people are forgetting this. I talk with younger people and they are totally clueless about what the Coconut Grove fire was, and it's a lesson that should not be forgotten. I know as a youngster in the Boston public schools, I remember in the second grade they were teaching us all about how to do the fire drills properly. And that was the first time I heard what the Coconut Grove fire was. And they drilled into our head at that time the importance of not panicking. Although as I got older, I found out that it was a lot more than panic that night in the Coconut Grove. Casey mentioned to us a lot of the things that have come about with the building codes, the fire codes. I think back and I look at them, and after I saw what happened down at the Station nightclub fire back in 2004, we can see the lessons weren't learned. But I stop and think, if they only had one or two of the features we asked for, if they had adequate exits, if they had an alarm system, if they had sprinklers, if they had doors that weren't locked, if they had materials that weren't combustible, if you only had one or two of those things in there, you wouldn't have had the tragedy happen at the Coconut Grove or happen at the Station nightclub fire. So the point is, these are lessons that must be reinforced. This memorial will serve to honor the victims, and it's important for the families to know that these people who suffered so that night were not forgotten and won't be forgotten in the years to come. That is very important for them. It's also very important that we remember what happened that night, how the city came together, first responders, the fire department, the police department, Boston City Hospital, the Mass General, Chelsea Naval, all the medical institutions, the military installations around the city of Boston. Without prior warning, they came together that night. The civilians came forward that night. Everybody came together to do the right thing. The guys who drove the newspaper trucks, the cab drivers, they transported these victims to the hospitals throughout the city. It was a real exercise in the wonders of how the better angels in us can come together when we have a terrible disaster take place. It's too bad it takes a disaster or something of this scope and tragedy for us to react as real human beings and care for one another. But that is the case, and it took place then. It took place the day of the Boston Marathon bombing. It took place during the blizzard of '78. It's taken place during other times. So we all know that we have that capacity within us. Just to reflect back, in November 1942, what was going on in the city of Boston. We all know we were a year into World War II. As was mentioned earlier, there was a fire almost 2 weeks earlier in East Boston where 6 Boston firefighters were killed. 45 were severely injured. One of them amongst the severely injured was John V. Stapleton. He was the captain of Engine 26, the father of future Fire Commissioner Leo Stapleton. He had a fractured skull. The night of the Coconut Grove fire, he was in the Boston City Hospital. Leo Stapleton told me he went in to visit his father the next day with his family, and the father who was in the hospital said something bad must have happened last night. There was an awful commotion in the hospital and all night long. He recovered from his fractured skull, returned to duty with the Boston Fire Department, and went on to become chief of the Boston Fire Department. His son became fire commissioner, and now third generation firefighter John Stapleton is now with Engine 42 in Boston. Over the years, though, I've come in contact with a lot of people visiting in this city who wanted to know more about the Coconut Grove. We've had visitors from fire services in Dublin, from England, from Australia. I had former fire commissioner in New York City, John O'Hagan, visiting in Boston. They all want to see the same thing. They had to come see the site and see what happened at the Coconut Grove. Most of them are amazed at the small size of what the club was. If you read about what took place there and the number of people who were actually in there, it's amazing that it was quite small. But the thing that stands out in my mind, for those of you who are familiar with Florian Hall, if you're ever in the lounge side of Florian Hall, that room is 60 feet by 60 feet. That is the size of the main dining room at the Coconut Grove. Just if you're ever in there, just look at that. And that is where there were over 500 people on that particular night. Getting back to the fire department. It was 2 weeks earlier we lost 6 firefighters, 45 in critical condition in the hospitals. The mood in the Boston Fire Department was very somber. On the night of November 28th, the blocks come in at about 10 past 10, right behind us here, for a car fire just up where that parking garage is. The companies responded, 4 engines, 2 ladders, a rescue, the district and deputy chiefs, and they were there. Small fire in the back seat of a car. They took care of the fire. The companies were just getting ready to make up and return, and someone noticed the fire down here, smoke coming out of the Coconut Grove. At the same time, calls were starting to be received in the fire alarm office for a fire at the Coconut Grove. These companies responded, got in there first. Immediately they started running the hose lines onto the Broadway side, Sharman Street. The other companies were coming in on Piedmont Street. The firefighters started breaking open the doors. The engines were running the hose lines in to cool down the atmosphere so the firefighters could make entry. They saw what they were faced with immediately. On the Piedmont Street side, they had revolving doors. They had a door that was jammed locked. They forced them open, and they started removing the victims. The firefighters later reported their hands were getting burned. They had scratch marks on their legs from people trying to grab at them, the victims trying to get out. This was happening on the Piedmont Street side. On the Broadway side, firefighters were faced with glass block windows. They couldn't smash them, but they were able to get through the doors, run hoses into that side. On Sharman Street, they had better success. They were able to break open the windows there and get quite a few victims out of there. So the point is that the firefighters that night made a tremendous amount of rescues, and I firmly believe that they held down the number of potential victims. And fortunately, they were able to get them to the hospitals much faster than had they been not at the scene as early as they were. The lessons of the Coconut Grove were painful, and many people have reported to us here today the benefits that have come from them. They came with a price. Just last week I was reading, I believe on the computer, about a new gel treatment that is coming out they're experimenting with for burn treatment. So the lessons of the Grove will be immortalized forever with this memorial. We will not forget the victims, and we will never forget those, the medical people, the firefighters, the police officers, the ordinary citizens that stepped forward on that night, and we all came together as one city, and we all remembered how David Ortiz explained how Boston is. I will not repeat his words today, but we all know what Boston does when things get tough. We do come together as one city. So with that, I thank you for your attention. It's my honor now to present to you the President of Boston Firefighters Local 718, President Sam Dillon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Commissioner. Thank you all for joining us here today. On behalf of Boston Firefighters Local 718, I want to speak very highly of all the work that this commission has put in after over 80 years to finally make this the reality that the survivors, the descendants of the survivors, and that this city deserves. Everyone on that commission has put in of their own time, of their own energy, and we're here to commemorate the tragedy that took place at the Coconut Grove. But as the plaque states, a phoenix from the ashes, the hard work of this commission and the hard work of the survivors and their families is going to be reflected in this memorial. Thank you very much for all that you've done to commemorate that. As we're standing here hearing the history of the Coconut Grove, the many layers of tragedy, not just from that night, but came afterwards, I do want to point out your Boston firefighters standing alongside this memorial in our gathering today. These guys represent some of the first responding companies that night to the Coconut Grove. And the equipment that they use, the uniforms that they wear, the fire trucks that they ride on look a lot different. But one thing that we promise has not changed, and we promise will never change, is that heart and that pride and that commitment to running into a situation like the Coconut Grove, like the Marathon bombing, like 6 alarms that you heard the mayor speak of yesterday. The trucks look different, the uniforms look different, the badge is the same, and the heart and mentality are exactly the same. And that is our promise to this city. As long as we are here, that will never change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Next, I'd like to introduce former Boston Fire Commissioner Marty Pierce and a member of the Coconut Grove Memorial Committee.
I know you people are dressed for the weather, but I'm going to be quick. I want to first of all say my special thanks to Mike Hanlon and the late Ken Marshall, who have taken the lead and played a major role in getting the Coconut Grove Memorial to this point in the design and construction phase for this worthy memorial. Today we pay our respects, like the previous speakers have said, to all who were victims of one of the deadliest fires in our nation's history, and to the survivors, the families, the friends, who were deeply touched forever by this devastating tragedy. No person was untouched on that November night 81 years ago, because everyone knew someone who was killed, injured, or survived. Despite the new codes, local and state ordinances, fire prevention regulation efforts, and the benefits of new technology, we still remain victims of indifference and neglect. Even though the fire and building codes have improved, they are only effective if people follow them. The Kentucky Supper Club fire in '77, where 165 people died, the New York Happy Land Social Club fire in 1990, where 87 people died, and the Station Club fire in West Warwick, Rhode Island in 2003, killing 100 and injuring 230 people, prove beyond a reasonable doubt that tragedies in places of assembly can and do still occur. As firefighters and for public safety officials, our challenge has always been to deal with the mistakes of society and to respond to save lives and property, usually under very chaotic and very worse conditions. As this memorial now enters the design and construction phase, I believe that all victims, families, and friends, though bound by loss, truly believed in the establishment of this memorial and would have found a deep and quiet honor in having their kin remembered and their lives commemorated in a place of permanence for generations to see and learn. In the aftermath of all great disasters, this horrific tragedy resulted in changing forever the fire safety laws throughout the country and introduced remarkable new medical advancements in the treatment of burns, smoke inhalation, infections, and the use of penicillin and more. 81 years have gone by. A generation has passed since that fateful night, when in less than 12 minutes, 490 lives were lost and scores were injured. We remember today the lessons learned, and to borrow from a quote, let me just say, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marty. Appreciate it. At this point, I'd like to ask for brief testimonials from any of the family members from the fire. I know there's a few family members here who may want to share some remarks, and you're welcome to please come forward to the podium and speak. Come on up.
Hi. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words. My mom is one of the last two living survivors of the fire. Joyce Spector is her name. She's 99 years old now. She can't be here in person, but I felt it was important she be represented at this gathering. My beautiful mother. So as we take the next step towards permanent memorial to the Coconut Grove, for 75 years, my mother resisted coming to this site. She was 18 the night the fire started over her head in the Melody Lounge. Her fiancé died that night. She was in the area regularly, but the pain was just too great. She never talked about it. I didn't know about it until I was a teenager. Now with this memorial, all the people who lost their lives and those who survived and all of their loved ones will have a place not to avoid, but rather a place to remember and reflect. At the same time, those who don't know the story of the Coconut Grove will be able to learn of the tragedy and the great many advances that came from it. My mother she was interviewed in the part of the documentary of Six Locked Doors. The last lines that she quoted in that movie were that she is blessed to have survived. Out of her survival came her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren. And she's still here, which she is. So speaking along those lines, I'm leaving the ceremony today to attend the 9th birthday party for my grandson, her great-grandson. If she had not survived that night, I wouldn't be here and that party wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be celebrating today. So I thank all the people that risked their lives to save her life, and just everyone here. I thank the Memorial Committee for making this day finally happen, and look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm from Boston, so I know how to dress for the weather. I'll try to be brief, though. This is how the Coconut Grove fire impacted me. When I was a child, my mom got out a book from the library, and she said to my dad, "There they are on the first page." I didn't know what she meant. But when I got older and I got interested in the history of Boston, I got out that book and I understood exactly what she meant. Florence Zimmerman was 22 years old, a young, vibrant woman, and she grew up in the Blue Hill Ave neighborhood of Dorchester. And on November 28th, 1942, she was out on a date with Corporal Harold Goldenberg, also from Blue Hill Ave neighborhood, and a local pharmacist. And the reason they're mentioned on the first page of Paul Benzequin's book, Fire, is because they were sitting at a table that was right where the fire started. They were at ground zero. Florence Zimmerman is the cousin I never got to know. As I think about this, and I'm listening to, the past, I think we've done a very good job of preventing reoccurrences of tragedies. I mean, we have excellent building codes, excellent fire codes, terrific fire first responders and medical staff. And I think we're very good at preventing these kinds of tragedies from reoccurring. What concerns me, the takeaway from me, is that we need to be vigilant and prepared to prevent future tragedies that have never occurred, because those are the ones that could cause us even more harm in the future. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Jim Cavan. I'm a proud member of the Coconut Grove Memorial Committee. I'm speaking today as a prouder member of the Capone family, many of whom are back over there, and my mother, Phyllis Cavan, Capone Cavan. We're here to memorialize and remember my great uncle, my mother's uncle and godfather, Charles Capone of Roslindale, who was 25 when he passed. He was out with his cousin John DiMatteo, also family, who was 21 for a farewell to an employee of their construction companies, Francis Connell, who was 21 and shipping out to World War II the following day. As Charlie never had the opportunity to have a family of his own, he's been a constant source of prayer for my mother and the family over the years, so we're proud to memorialize him. Frequently, the talk is how the fog of war erases pain and memories, but so too with time erasing memories of family through fog, and time helps us forget. For most of my family, Uncle Charlie passed before any of us were born. My mother was only 16 months old at the time and has held on to that memory almost as tightly as she holds on to this picture. But the wonderful work of the Coconut Grove Memorial Committee has allowed us to now have this lost family member illuminated, as historians and the research of everyone has brought back Great Uncle Charlie to all of our time. We can now look at the tragic events with the lens of positives that resulted. Global fire code standards and a novel of medical burn therapies that are used today, as have been spoken about. We mourn the 490 lost, but cannot calculate the souls saved by the lessons learned. That's the message my family and I hold on to. This event cannot be marked without calling out the limitless bravery of the Boston Fire Department, facing an event beyond which they should have been asked and serving with the greatest of honor and distinction. As well, the doctors and nurses of Boston's hospitals who, as it's been mentioned, likewise never stopped and created, out of desperation to aid and save lives, treatments that have continued to go on to save so many. Thank you to the City of Boston, to Mayor Wu, for the ongoing support, and thank you all for not letting this event be lost to the fog of history. Thank you.
First of all, thank you to everybody who helped that night, everybody who's involved in this memorial. I have connections on both sides of the story. My mother, Cleo Lambridas, was in the Melody Lounge with her boyfriend, Fred Brooke, and they both survived the fire with injuries. And my father, Dr. Richard Webster, was a resident in the burn unit at the Mass General Hospital that night. And they wouldn't meet for a few years after the fire, but both sides of my family were involved in this. And my mother never spoke about it, like many of the other survivors. We knew about it, but where she was interviewed for the movie was the first time I heard her whole story. And she really wanted to see this memorial happen, and she's looking down on us and very grateful. So thank you all.
Oh, one more. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Paula Gill Alexander, and my parents, John and Margaret Gill, were survivors of the fire. I was a little late. We took the train from the South Coast, and I don't know if anyone mentioned that it was a big victory party for the BC Holy Cross game, but BC lost. They went on to victory in other games, go Eagles, and my parents, my mother was only 27 years old, 3 small children at home. If you're guessing, I wasn't born at the time. I came several years later. And we had a family of 8 children. And my father saved my mother and several other people in their party. They got trampled on when they were trying to get out. And my father had the presence of mind to ask the busboy how he got out at night, because the doors were all locked, as you know. I don't have a picture of him, but he's at the end of 6 locked doors for being interviewed at the hospital. His name's John Gill, and my mother miraculously was battered a little, but able to go home in a couple of days. We were contacted by a fire department for I think the 50th anniversary, and someone else had reached out to us about an HBO documentary in 1982 where my father was in the newsreels. So we grew up knowing about this, like most survivors' families. My parents didn't talk about it a great deal. But at the end of the documentary, the owner of the nightclub said, "I wish I'd never owned that nightclub." And all my father said was, "I wish there'd never been a fire." Oh, thank you.
I'm going to be very quick. I know it's cold out here. My name is Karen Burns Lechner, and my father, Robert Burns, and his older brother, William, were in the Melody Lounge on the 28th of November in 1942. And they did a lot of things together, but one of the things that they caused them to diverge in their lives was that my father was in the U.S. Air Force, the Army Air Force, and my Uncle Bill joined the Navy, and they were born and raised in Philadelphia, but happened to be in Boston at the same time doing coursework for the military for their respective specialty fields. And so they decided to come to the Coconut Grove that night. And at the time the fire broke out, my understanding was that they had a hard time getting up the steps because people were falling, and the way they managed to survive was they followed a woman with a cash bag in her hands down the steps into the kitchen and stayed in the refrigerator until I understood it was the fire chief, Chief McDonough, was it? Chief McDonough, maybe, that got them out. My father ended up at Mass General. He was one of the members of the burn study that they did at Mass General, and my uncle was given last rites out on the pavement and went to, I think, Boston City Hospital. And during the aftermath with both of his sons in the hospital, different hospitals, my grandfather took the train up from Philadelphia to visit and did a side trip to the Coconut Grove fire scene and fell injured I think he sprained or broke his ankle and ended up at Boston City Hospital. So there were 3 burns men in different hospitals at the time. But the thanks and gratitude that we have for the firefighters and the first responders of all kinds, including the pedestrian rescuers and medical personnel, is that my father went on to serve in the military, my uncle went on to serve in the military. They both got married, and I'm the third of 8 children, and my Uncle Bill had 11 children. So there's a big family tree of gratitude to the first responders of the Coconut Grove. Thank you.
Wow, great. Thank you, everyone. Oh, one more. Okay. One more, I promise.
Hello, everyone. This is my great-aunt Grace. Grace, as you've known as a performer Vaughn, but her last name was McDermott. I drove up with her from New York a short time ago. I wanted to be present to honor her memory and recall the beauty that she could provide by playing piano and singing Irish songs, and the preservation of the beauty that came before the fire, the reverie, is memorialized now, and I appreciate the city of Boston, mayor, and everyone to honor all of those who perished or in some ways more unfortunately survived and suffered during that. My Aunt Patty recalls sitting and listening to the Victrola playing some of Great Aunt Grace's songs. Not 3 weeks after Great Aunt Grace perished, my mother, who was named after her, Grace McDermott, was born, and that's why I'm here. And it's only my third time to Boston, but I'm sure I feel proud of this venture by everyone, and we will return. I know this will be her second home here, and thank you for
Wow. Well, thank you to all the family members. I mean, you're the reason we're here. And what a stirring tribute to all your family members. Thank you so much. So I'd like to thank Mayor Wu again, Ambassador Flynn, City Council President Ed Flynn as our guest speakers, and all the Coconut Grove families. We look forward to seeing you again next year right here in Statler Park for the unveiling. It'll be sometime after Labor Day in September, we're hoping. Check our website at coconutgrove.org for news and updates. Make sure that we have your contact information. There's some notebooks circulating around and a couple of iPads, I think. We're all headed to MJ O'Connor's pub afterwards to continue the conversation. You're welcome to join us. But this concludes the program for today, and thank you so much for coming.